Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. It's been a while since I've gone live, and just had some stuff happening, domestically. That's a lot of rearranging things that's kind of prevented me from coming online. And I thought I would take a little bit of time this afternoon to take any calls and kind of catch up on what's been going on in the various doings around the world of Mormonism and other topics. So what I'll do is I'll put the banner up real quick, and if anyone is interested in calling and sharing what's going on in their mind or has questions that are good topics for discussion, then I'd be happy to take those calls. The number is 210-422-2222. Again, the number is 210-422-2222. In the meantime, there were a couple of posts that I made in the Mormon Stories podcast group a few weeks ago that got a little bit of discussion going. And it's following kind of a thread that has been developing in my mind as I've studied various different things that I thought it might be fun to go ahead and review here. So let me see if I can share screen, and we'll share a window, and we'll bring up this particular one. Okay, so I'll see if I can make it big. So this post starts out with an image, and it's an image of this really technical. Hold on a second, I'm getting echoing happening on my stream. That is no bueno. So let me see what I can do to fix that. This is part of the rearranging issue that I've had. Okay, so that is on cable B output. And if I go to cable B over here, actually, I'll just change this to. Okay, I'm sorry about the technical issues. I should have fixed this before, but it's hard for me to actually know what's wrong until I go live with it. So if that's going to cable B, then I have to find cable B. And cable B is a lot easier when I do this on Mac. I'm on Windows right now, and it's ridiculous. Okay, so I am probably just going to have to take this and do this as Yeti. Okay, so if I do that, the echo will be gone, but I'll have problems when it comes time that somebody's actually called. So we will figure that out when it happens. Okay, now the audio is choppy. All right, so I'm going to restart the audio system, and boop. Okay, so if you guys can give me some feedback on the audio, I may have to delete this whole thing and figure out a better way to go it. I wish I could put something more professional together for this, but this is just what the limitations are presently. Okay, so continuing along. Again, if you want to call, you can dial 210-422-2222. So this particular post starts out with this highly technical device here, and you can find videos about this online. This is the world's most perfect sphere. And it's been engineered. It's made out of a single crystal. And it's important because it's become the new standard for what a kilogram is. And so it's the standard by which then we can gauge our instruments, by which standards are made for all sorts of things so that everybody's kind of speaking the same language physically, engineering wise. And the ability to create this is in and of itself a technical marvel, because you could look at a pool ball and it seems at our scale like it's really smooth, it's really perfect. But if you were to magnify and make the pool ball as large as the earth, there would be all sorts of topography on it because it actually isn't that perfect when you look at it. Well, this sphere is so perfect that if you were to take it and blow it up the size of the earth, it would just be a few meters between the highest point and the lowest point. It's that perfect. But it's still not perfect. And so that's kind of the starting point for this particular discussion. And let's see here. I will try to read it. It looks like my screenshot actually messed up. So let me see what I can do to improve that. I will come over here, and this is just really shoddy professionalism on my part. I can only offer my apologies in this regard. Okay, there we go for that. And I would just bring up Facebook, but it's in a group that you shouldn't be posting, or other people commenting that they may not want to have their names on it. So I have to just take a screenshot of it. Okay, I'll do this right here, like this selected area, and we'll go from there. Okay, and in the meantime, if somebody calls in at 210-422-2222, then we can talk. Okay, so if I open this new screenshot, and I will hit this share screen and window and that share. There we go. Okay, so here we go. This is the roundest sphere on Earth. It's made out of a single crystal of silicon-28. Its roundness has a delta of less than 59 nanometers over a 30.6 millimeter diameter. It helps determine the current kilogram standard by which all other relevant measures are referenced. Now, it's not perfect. It's pretty good. It's a dang important thing to have around to refer to, but instead of appreciating how useful and essential it is, you could focus on how it still isn't perfect. You can magnify the nanometer defects on its surface and blow them out of proportion, and seeing those imperfections, you could declare that the entire enterprise is defective and defunct. You could problematize it. You could problematize it from the perspective of its surface imperfections, its internal density variations and impurities, however small they may be, the role that it has as a standard bearer. The creativity and eloquence that you employ in this problematization may even get you noticed by the masses. You might even get some clout and a following. Other people would adopt and expand on your arguments, and this is a really alluring pathway to go down. Still, you could instead appreciate things for their positive qualities despite their defects. You can acknowledge how they positively impact our world, even with their faults. This is also a pathway that you can choose to go down. Now, I can imagine people saying, well, you're just making excuses to defend the church. Don't you know it's a cult? You've turned into a cult apologist. Well, it could be that the sphere represents the church in this metaphor. It could also represent you. How would you want others to view and judge you? Would you want to be surrounded by people who look at the world through the lens of problematization or through the lens of appreciation? Maybe the sphere is the church, or maybe it's traditional values and morality. Maybe it's your friend who sees the world differently from you. Maybe it's some other thing that we've been all told is just no good because it upholds structures of power. Does a sphere representing a standard weight uphold any structures of power? Are there structures of power that are good? Are there other things to consider than power in our analysis of the world? Anyway, if you are new in your faith transition journey, realize that there are approaches to criticism of the church which are informed by philosophies that bleed into tearing down pretty much everything else in the world that would otherwise be seen as virtuous, lovely, or of good report or praiseworthy. And it will seem like that's the path you have to walk when you pursue a life outside of the church, but it isn't. That's kind of the first salvo of content that I put, and it generated some good conversation, I think. A lot of people trying to argue that the sphere represented the church, and so I was just trying to get people to excuse the faults of the church in some other way. I think a lot of the issue about this is once you get out and you start criticizing the church and you start looking at the way other people are criticizing the church and you start to examine the nature of those criticisms, and then you say, well, if I'm going to criticize the church in this particular way, what other things then am I obligated to criticize because they commit the same sins? And not only that, but when you're criticizing something, you're taking some standard of morality, some standard of truth, and you're pointing out the difference from it. But you'll start to realize that people have created whole new standards based on very different values and ideals. And if you haven't looked at those standards and their implications, you may adopt a moral framework or a moral standard that ends up demonizing something that is not really worthy of that demonization, but is only when you put on that particular lens or that particular philosophy in order to look at it. And so the idea here is that you want to be very thoughtful and introspective about the nature of your criticism, whether it's the church or your friend or yourself, and just be very careful about adopting a perspective that places a very narrow, myopic view on finding criticism and only looks for criticism and does not also look at the good and try to find the value in the good and put that in the context. One of the things that I think becomes very appealing is once you're in the church and you find problems with the church and you find problems with the leaders, you do a lot of study because you want to learn everything. So you study Joseph Smith's life and Brigham Young's life and all the things that go on. You find a lot of different problems, and so you're very ready and very able to articulate those problems. But then you get out, you depart from the church, you go to some other places, but then you may adopt philosophies that come from other people, and you may follow along with social movements started and governed by ideas of other people, much in the way that leaders of a church would govern the ideas that the church has. But if you haven't done the same sort of critical analysis, going back and looking into those particular ideas, where they came from, who is it that's guiding it, you may find yourself falling into a group of people that are governed by ideas generated with people with the same, if not worse, sins, so to speak, than Joseph Smith. I think the classic one that you can bring up is power dynamics. So if you listen to Mormon Stories podcast, if you listen to all the different things, you're going to hear a lot of discussion of power dynamics. Oh yeah, there's the power dynamics of this or that or bad. You always have to stand up for the the marginalized against the powerful, as though whether or not something is marginalized or powerful is its moral. It's all that there is to say about its moral worth. But when you go back and you say, well, when did we start looking at things just through the lens of power dynamics? And so you can start looking at the philosophical roots of that, and eventually you're going to cross the great philosopher Michel Foucault, who was kind of the guy who gave the greatest deal of life and power to this concept of power dynamics and how it pervades our discourse and establishes who gets to say what about what is right, what is wrong, what is true. And so it sounds, if you look at the life of Michel Foucault, however, you'll find that uh, there's issues with pedophilia, there's issues with sexual abuse in that regard that are all around his life. So if you've left the Mormon church because you have all of these issues with Joseph Smith and pedophilia or whatever arguments, and then you start talking and using power dynamics as your sole lens for stuff, you you may have adopted the philosophy and thinking of a person who is just as problematic as Joseph Smith. But even beyond the origin of that way of thinking, when you see how that way of thinking plays out in living your life, so that you look at everything primarily through the lens of power dynamics and oppressor oppressed binaries, then then you may find that your life is actually it's harder to have any social cohesion in any diverse group because everybody is playing that same game of seeing themselves in intersectional hierarchies of power dynamics. And suddenly the ability to keep a group together, to have social cohesion, to have mutual trust, and to minimize things like resentment disappears. And these groups that are informed primarily by power dynamics end up dissolving because it's just not a way that humans, in all their diversity, in all their frailties, in all their strengths and weaknesses, can actually exist and coexist together. And there's something about the way that religions have evolved over time, populated by these imperfect humans, that has allowed them to stay cohesive. And some of the things that allow that to be cohesive include some of the practical results of the theological principles that are part of a religion, whether it's grace and forgiveness, or the concept that we take the idea of a perfect person who is without sin, and rather than trying to hold people up to this impossible standard, we place that standard in the person of somebody who is above and beyond human, so that no human can lay claim to being perfect and above sin, and everybody is in the position of striving for it. Like there's, when you do that, you kind of diffuse the idea that anyone can be perfect, and it allows imperfect people to coexist a little bit better without tearing each other down constantly, or at least it opens that possibility. So there's aspects about how religious principles govern the social fabric of a religious society that allow them to stay together and to live together and to work together, that when you abandon and you start looking at the world through power dynamics, it ends up just dissolving things. And that power dynamics lens is just one of those ways. When you start to criticize something, if you're using that perspective to do all of your criticism, it doesn't end. Like you're always going to be able to find anything that previously you could respect and see that it holds a place in a power dynamic. And you could just take something like beauty. You know, there's something inherent and evolutionary about beauty that is part of us as a human species, whether it's symmetry, imperfections, health, all of these different things that go into the concept of beauty as it's kind of like an articulation of order opposed to chaos. Well, those are things that there's some evolutionary advantage for, and our brains have been programmed to see and appreciate those things. And so it gives things that possess this ephemeral quality of beauty advantage, power. And so then the things that aren't beautiful are oppressed because things that are beautiful exist. And then suddenly you start to get, uh, anything that you previously could have said is good or beautiful, you can only now problematize because you've taken this power dynamic basis for the lens of your criticism. And so that's just kind of where this stuff goes. And it can be hard, if you're just coming out of the church now, may listen to a rant like this and say, well, that's ridiculous. This guy's clearly been, you know, drunk on too much anti-woke propaganda and everything. And that's fine. You don't like, I think just understanding that some people have said, hey, if this is your worldview, it's going to be really hard to hold a group of people together because it ends up becoming a circular firing squad where people just turn on each other, and you start getting purity spirals and the thing that people are calling cancel culture, which it's easy to dismiss until you are the target of it, and you see how it just kind of causes everybody to silence themselves and to continually check their communications to make sure that they're not guilty of any of the dogmatic sins that would call for those things. And it's no place that you actually want to be. You'd much rather be in a group of people that aren't constantly thought policing each other from this new non-religious, strict puritanical secular moral framework. It's a lot easier to exist in that type of environment. Okay, well, I think my desire to have a call-in show may be thwarted by my technical limitations and nobody calling in. So let's see here. I want to make sure I haven't missed anything. All right. Boop. We will hit allow on that. And 149. No. Okay. So if you want to call in and share what's on your mind, you can dial 210-422-2222. And in the meantime, let me see if I have the second post. Okay, yeah, I do. Shortly after the perfect sphere post, I made a second one that I will bring up here under the heading of some things which are not true are actually useful. Okay. And the thing about this one is, there's certain characters and personalities when you're in the church that you'll be attracted to because they can articulate the articles of the faith, the theology really well. And Boyd K. Packer was one of those. But then when you leave the church and you start seeing things differently, they kind of grate on you and they hit you a different way. And Boyd K. Packer was definitely one of those. And he's famous in ex-Mormon circles for making the statement that some things which are true are not actually very useful. And this is in the context of a talk he's giving to church historians, where he's kind of ticked off because some historians have been laying out some of the truth of church history, but it's truth which ends up eroding faith because it reveals some of the deceptive nature of Joseph Smith and early church leaders. And so at that point, he's trying to say, hey, yeah, even though these things are true, they're not useful because they end up tearing down faith in the minds of the members. And so we don't actually want to publish all the truth. We want to publish a very curated version of church history, and that's what you should be doing as church historians. Well, this is an article that tries to kind of explore the concept of things which may not be true, but may actually still be useful. And so this is how it starts. So, one thing that religion does is package a bunch of values and principles that have some power in producing a prosperous, stable life that has a degree of effectiveness in getting its adherents to a point where they can replicate and convey that way of life to the next generation. Some religions are great at this, and others aren't. If your religion causes you to delete yourself, sort of like Heaven's Gate or People's Temple, then it really isn't very good at that, particularly on the replication point. On the plus side, those particular values and traditions will not be passed on to any subsequent generation to any significant degree. You know, if your theology gets you to the point where you self delete, then it's good that those ideas don't get passed on and conveyed into future generations, because you're just going to end up having more people doing that. And so that kind of is an introduction to the idea that with religions, there is sort of an evolutionary process at play. Religions have different characteristics, which may be better or worse at stability and prosperity of a single generation, or passing things on to the next generation, or holding a society together. And the power a religion has to do those things will affect how much of its signal gets transmitted to the next generation. So, continuing. On the other hand, if your religion promotes families, instills resilience, gratitude, an ethic of sacrifice, selflessness, and social responsibility, then it will have a greater power in the life of its adherents for them to achieve resilience, prosperity, stability, and replication. Those values may be conveyed through the stories or myth of the religion, regardless of the objective truth of those stories. So, a story may be told that conveys a value, and an individual that incorporates that value into their identity will enjoy the benefits of that value, regardless of the truth of the story used to convey it. Also, these values and principles may not be immediately apparent or concrete. It may be a value as general as an attitude towards life's inevitable challenges, a focus on gratitude and how that affects the impulse to preserve things, a model of relationships that serves as a filter to less lasting unions, or something more tangible, such as a focus on education and delayed gratification. These things can have their positive effects regardless of the truth of the myth, scripture, or story that's used to convey them and instill them in the lives of the adherents of the faith. This is one reason why there may be studies that show that, quote, religious people fare better on some important life metrics like happiness and resilience. It's not because of the truthfulness of any particular religious claim, but because of the evolutionarily powerful values and principles that are conveyed and bundled up by the religion, which have allowed it to survive as long as it has. The reason that some religions survive for centuries while others die off or wither after just a generation or two has something to do with the evolutionary power of the particular set and bundle of values and principles that are instilled by the religion, and how they either promote or inhibit resilience, prosperity, stability, and replication within an individual's life. If you add social cohesion and mutual social support to the understanding of the evolutionary process of a group, and you can get groups that have strong identity and internal resilience on the positive side, or groups that may foster internal discord, division, and chaos on the negative side. Now, keep in mind, whether or not the truth claims made by the organization are objectively true or not is irrelevant to whether or not the effect of the values and principles instilled into an adherent have their results in the life of the adherent. So Boyd K. Packer actually got it backwards. It's not that some things which are true are not useful. A more important observation is that it's actually that some things which are not true can actually be very useful. And there's an important correlate to this. When you leave a religion that has survived the evolutionary filter of centuries, you should understand that the truth claims of the religion are not as important as the values and principles of a life that has been refined and conveyed through the vehicle of that religion that has given its adherents the qualities which promote resilience, prosperity, stability, and intergenerational replication. Now, you may discard the truth claims of the group, but be very careful about discarding the values and principles that accompany those truth claims and discuss. Okay, so the, I think this is a way of looking at religion that tries to get uh, to an understanding that particularly for those of us that get out of religion because we did the research, we did the study, we found, there's the sexual predation of the origin of the religion, there's the lies, there's the deception, there's the continued, and all of those things exist and they're absolutely problematic. But what a religion is as it passes through the lives of multiple generations changes, and what it represents in the lives of the people is so much more than the lies of its founder. And I think a lot of us will come out of Mormonism in particular, and we will be able to recall and talk about the things that Mormonism did positively for us in our life, whether it was giving us a firm uh, moral lens through which to see the world and see ourselves, even though it does have flaws. Whether it gave us a commitment to sacrifice, to honesty, all the way that it shaped your character, whether it gave you an idea of gratitude for your elders or for people who went before and the sacrifices that they made, and that informed your own willingness to make sacrifices for future generations. All of those things come together in the life of the individuals, and it's tied in with our own sense of wanting a place of belonging, of wanting to be able to feel certain that the milestones in our life were going to be worth it, and that we were going to be able to navigate a life and make it. When you're in a culture that has all of these different milestones, such as Mormonism or many other religious traditions, then you're able to have some stability in that, and you can have some confidence in that stability because people have passed through many generations shaped by that particular religious culture, and so it's kind of proven the test of time. And you could just look back at like the 1960s, where there was movements in America departing away from the mainstream cultural paradigm that was rooted in Protestant Christianity, and saying, well, we're going to go our own way now, and we're going to focus on things like free love and psychedelics and a bunch of things that you could say are not inherently wrong or immoral if you let go of that religious paradigm. But by letting go of that religious paradigm and taking these steps out into new ways of living a life and navigating a life, then you're letting go of a lot of the benefits that don't have anything to do with the truth claims of the religion, but may have more to do with how a stable family unit can raise a child and and help a child navigate the transition into adulthood, or how a family can increase its own prosperity, or how a family or a community can weather the storms of the challenges that life brings by having a good cohesive unit of mutual support. Like, all of those things have been part of the evolutionary pressures which have shaped a religious culture over centuries and allowed its adherents to have it. But when you abandon them, then, like, how many of the people that went into the hippie communes of the 1960s are still there? Like, how many of those communes still exist and still have a thriving culture and multiple generations that have all grown up in that culture? They just don't exist, because while things like polyamory and free love and all those things may be exciting, they may be thrilling, to the extent that you're departing away from these cultural traditions that have stood the test of time because they allow an individual in a society's life to have that stability. In particular, stability is such a powerful thing, and the intergenerational replication, those things have just been lost. And so, people that go on those pathways will end up risking being in a much worse off place. Sure, they may not have guilt for the free love or the polyamory or those things, but the children that may be raised in that environment will be less likely to have the sense of stability, which can be so important in the development of a child and their future well-being. So there's an episode of The Simpsons that frequently comes to mind when I talk about this, which is an episode where Lisa Simpson, and I want to do some clips of this at some point in the future, where Lisa Simpson does some research about the founder of Springfield because he's celebrated by them. They like have an annual party where they all get together as a community and celebrate the founder of Springfield. Well, she finds out that he was actually like a terrible person. He was a racist, he was a liar, he was a criminal, but nobody knows that. And so she does all this research and then comes to she wants to tell everybody about how this guy was terrible. So she's given the opportunity at their festival to address the crowd. And just as she's about to tell them all what a terrible person he was, she sees the community has come together. They have a strong sense of identity. They're doing things to uphold and uplift and support each other all around the mythology of this founder of their community that ties them together and gives them an identity and adds to their purpose in their community. And rather than try to destroy that, she goes along with the lie and she says he was really great. And I've thought about that a lot because these religions are more impactful in the lives of the people who live it, and what it means to the individuals who live in these cultures, in these religious cultures, is more than the founder and the flaws and faults of the founder. um, it, to the extent that they allow these lives to be lived with that stability and with all these different positive things that are part of it, um, the character of the founder doesn't really matter as much as the impact in the life of the values and principles that are bundled together in the culture of the religion. Now, this is not to say that these religions are perfect or that there's no reason for them to change. Clearly, they have evolved over time, but that evolution has been shaped by humanity's own evolution in moral understanding. So, if a religion existed at a time where we still had what we now see as terrible ideas about racial inequality and a sense that some races are inferior to others, re- revolu- religions have evolved to abandon those bad ideas and reshape themselves to convey the evolutionary power of seeing humanity as a great whole, and different religions will express that in different ways. The Mormon church tries to convey this through expressing the idea that all are alike unto God and we're all children of God, and they see that as a unifying principle to keep people together. And that's been the result of an evolutionary process where past ideas really did not work out with the church and would have led to its dissolution if they hadn't adapted to the times. And we're likely seeing that same sort of evolutionary process happen today, but these processes are necessarily slow. And there are some cultural movements that can come and be very disruptive. And if a particular religion immediately jumps on any cultural movement that happens, they may run the risk of you know, saying, okay, we're going to adopt free love, just like the hippies do. And that's now going to be our standard for marriage. Well, if they do that too quickly without saying, well, hold on a second, how does this actually affect things? Then they may lose some of the power that they have from some of their traditional standards. So that's a lot of words to basically just convey that some things which are not true are actually useful. Um, Another metaphor that gets invoked frequently on this idea is Dumbo's feather, which is that the idea that Dumbo had in the Disney movie Dumbo, where he could fly as long as he had this magic feather, was the lie that had the utility of giving him confidence in himself so that he would take a chance on his ability and learn to claim his power to fly. And the feather was a lie, but it was useful. And eventually he learned about the lie, but it didn't take away what he had learned about himself and the power that he had in doing so. And So I think that's one of the things that it can be very easy to, when you discover the problems and the flaws of a church and you discard it and you walk away, it can be very easy to say, I'm just going to basically start from scratch and I'm not going to take anything that the church had at face value and I'm going to try to learn everything on my own and come to that determination on my own. And that's one way that you could take your journey outside of the church. Another way that's a different option would be, I I'm going to understand that the truth claims of the church may not have foundation, but there is something about the values and principles of the church that actually do convey prosperity, resilience, stability. And so I'm going to look at each of those values and see if I can hold on to them and keep them because they can be justified on their own without a need for a claim of divine command. Or if I need to modify them because, for example, with the word of wisdom, there may be really strong evidence that avoiding alcohol excess or avoiding certain types of drugs can have a positive effect in the lives of the people who adopt that principle, whereas avoiding coffee or something like that doesn't necessarily have the same power when you look at the evidence. So just kind of looking at your values and principles and modifying and holding on to the ones that you can see that they actually do serve a strong, powerful, beneficial thing, then you kind of get some of the advantages and benefit of the evolutionary filter of values and principles that church went through over the centuries. And when you adopt the Mormon church as your paradigm, you're not just getting, the religious values from the origin of the Mormon church because they piggybacked and continued a even older centuries tradition of Christianity, and there were elements of that got conveyed through Mormonism itself. So it has stood the test of many generations, and a lot of people will look at something like the wealth of the church, and it's very easy to look at that wealth and point to it and demonize it and say, they're mismanaging the money. Another way you could look at it is that there is something about this religion that was started in the 1800s that has imparted into its members the ability to gather that amount of prosperity and save it. There's any organization that would try to give recommendations in the lives of its members to be prosperous and to save, that could amass that amount of wealth. Well, there's something that is happening in their lives that is very remarkable because no other organization could do that in that short of a time, even the Catholic Church. So, is that the focus on education? Is that the focus on sacrifice and delayed gratification? All these different things kind of get woven into the life of somebody who is raised Mormon. And those are principles that you might not want to abandon and discard, even if you step away from the church itself. And this doesn't mean that you have to pay tithing for it, but you can still have some of the benefits of those principles and value because they hold power in the life of an individual, regardless of if they were conveyed through a false myth or through lies and deceptions of a particular religious leader. Anyway, okay. So I think there was one other post on this thread of things. I wish I could go through and show y'all some of the comments and discussion because they were quite lively. There was just one other thing that I think was part of it. Let's share that. Okay, this was a image that I created as part of that because the responses that I got to these posts had a lot of people finding criticism with me, particularly because I was talking about some positive benefits that may exist in the church or a life shaped by the values and the principles of the church. Because you sometimes get into this mindset where you can only see the negative. And because the church does harm in the lives of some people who it affects negatively, that means that we should only focus on the harms and we should magnify that as much as possible. And that's, again, one perspective you can take. There's another perspective, which is that it's okay to acknowledge the good that the church has done in the lives of people. And it's okay to hold on to some of those values and principles. And regardless of what happens, if you leave the church and go, you're going to find yourself in other social groups and other social milieus. And it could be in person, whether you've found a community that you want to spend your time with, or it could be online in various digital social media communities. But if you start to see some of these things pop up that we are very ready to criticize the church in, whether it's shunning the non-believer, having sacred dogma that nobody can question, if anyone dissents from the right way, then you silence them or deplatform them or cancel them. If we all make sure that we're thinking the same thing, and any variance of thought is shunned as outside, and we get that groupthink mindset. If you're in a group where everybody has to prioritize feelings over reason, and if someone tries to bring in logical argument to try to understand something, then you just use feelings and emotion to dominate and suppress that type of rationality. If you see anyone who doesn't agree as evil, and anyone who dissents as evil, if you refuse to listen to any critical voices, if you find yourself excluding anyone who has any hetero heterodox thought by kicking them out of the group, you're shaping an echo chamber, a bubble that you're in. And it should be clear, if you've left a religious paradigm where that is done, that you don't want to simply go into another social milieu where we're also creating an echo chamber. Um, and then if you find that the power of shunning is such that if somebody gets shunned because they have wrong think, and then if other people are even friends with that person, well, then you're going to shun those people too. Those are all the sorts of cult-like things that we would very easily condemn in a religion. But if you are in a secular group or a social group or a community, a podcast community or something, and you're finding that stuff is happening, going on, you just want to be very careful. Realize that you may find yourself in a very similar, echo chamber that has a lot of those same social forces that we're trying to escape in coming out of those things. Okay. Well, I have not gotten any calls. It's probably because of my technical setup is no good. And I have a dog barking out there. Millie! So I think I will go ahead and close it down here. Hopefully, if I can work out these technical glitches, I should be able to pop on a little bit more frequently and take questions and discuss stuff. There are a few other interesting goings on that might be worth reviewing, but let's see here. I might, if some of you may have noticed, if you've followed some of my online stuff, that one of my hobbies now is learning how to do AI art. And so I've been having a lot of fun trying to learn how to train a particular character or a particular style. And this dog keeps trying to get my attention. Millie! Hey, Millie, what's going on? Come here. Okay. Many of y'all may not know that Yu-Gi-Oh has a girlfriend. Her name's Millie, and she can be a handful. Okay, so let's see here. We may be able to take a look at some of the work that's been done here. Let's see, text to images. Okay. Well, one of the things that I hope to be able to do soon is have an opportunity to look at some of the interesting characters in the various social movements. And one of them is this guy named Michel Foucault. And so I trained a model on him, and you can see some of the artifacts that happen. It's weird because when you train a model with samples, in addition to what is in the image, the aspect ratio of the image becomes important. And when you try to render an image with a different aspect ratio than it was trained on, you get all kinds of artifacts. So in this case, it was trained on mostly square images, but this is an image that was created with an aspect ratio of 4:3, and so it tries to render it, and it ends up blending things together. So you have to be somewhat careful in how you do that, and just make sure that you're generating your images in a way that is consistent with how they were formed. So this is a combination of models that are trained on Michel Foucault, as well as a cartoonist from Mad Magazine, and I balanced that with kind of a Pixar art um, rendering style. And so you can, like, each of these different inputs has a particular signal strength in the rendering that you do, and so you can adjust the strength of something. When you do a model, you want to make sure that it can actually render photorealistic images before you start to do stylized comic sort of things. So these are examples of how the model can do realistic images. And there's not too many color photos of Michel Foucault out there now. He was somebody that was prominent in the 60s, and for some reason I can't find many color photos of him. But these are fairly decent um, representations of him. One of his famous pictures has him with his finger like stuck to his nose, and so I tried to recreate that by trying to get him rendered with smelling his finger. So you put like Michel Foucault smelling his finger, and it's too much artifact on that. So you have to tweak with things. So these are examples of just trying to make the thumbnail for this particular episode. And so you can put stuff like reference the model and then reference the microphone and things like that. And you get some of the fun images there. Let's see, there have been some other people that I've trained models on. There's a guy named Jim Bennett who's made a lot of noise in certain Twitter spaces around the Mormon community, and so he's also been on Midnight Mormons or Ward radio quite a bit. So I think he kind of earned his AI model. So let's see here. I'll share that. And so let's see, it's going to take a little bit before it gets that. This is closer to his appearance, and you can adjust the caricature aspect of it, which I think we get to later. Different facial expressions. Hey, Steve, it's good to see you. Anyway, this is trying to increase the comic, the Mad Magazine sort of look to the images. And then let's see, this morning was also a Cardin Ellis model. Some of these guys are just people that I've interacted with that I think is kind of fun to have some of their art with. So let's see here. If anyone wants to call and chat, you can dial. Oh, wait, hold on. I might have a call. Let me see. If you called, call right back. For some reason, it didn't give me the info. Okay, let's see here. I'll move that over there. All right. Let's see here. Oh, here's Cardin. I tried to get. I wanted his hat to say dog, but I had to call it a ball cap. And the way that you design an AI prompt, you may give it the description like Cardin Ellis wearing a ball cap with the word dog on it, but it's going to take all the words and the signal will be incorporated in ways that are unpredictable. And so in this case, it put the word dog balls on his hat. Okay, so let's see here. If you tried to call a second ago, give it another shot and we'll see if we can make it work. I think, Jack, you were mentioning that. Let's see here. What else do I have? Okay, let's see if I can make it work here. Okay. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff. Hello. Yeah, I can hear you now. I think that the viewers may not be able to hear you, but I'm going to tweak with that, and I'll just repeat what you say if you want to tell me what's on your mind. Okay. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so if you want to hang up, I'll address it. Okay, you guys, let me know if you could hear that. I don't think it's set up so you could hear what he said. So his question was, he's heard some people say that the ideology that people are calling wokeness is in decline, and he's wondering if that is really the case or if that's just what people in their own echo chambers of anti wokeness are thinking. And I think that just like when the movement started, when what wokeness happened started, it happened in certain enclaves and it gained influence, and particularly in the academy and in the schools of education. It was much further there before it made its way into other institutions. And so it was kind of a piecemeal growth into our society and incorporating itself into there. And we really only noticed it late in the game that those types of philosophies were becoming such a big part of our institutions. I think we're going to start to have a very similar um, if there is a decline of that, it'll probably be piecemeal like that as well. And so I think you'll see some movements or some of the hydra of that movement decrease in favor than others. Now, some people are saying I can't hear. I hope that's the caller they're referring to and not me right now. But so I think that because of the phenomenon of detransitioners and because of lawsuits that will be put forth to the medical professionals that uh, acted against medical ethics in doing some of the hormones and surgeries, I think that movement is going to probably wane faster than some of the other movements. So things like the result of critical race theory, I think that's going to be a lot harder to disappear because it wrestles with things that are a lot more tied to our real world experience in terms of racism, and you have to understand that it's a different conception of racism and a different prescription of what to do about it. And so it'll be, I think, slower for that to back off. Um, and and so we'll just see how it goes. I think the we were at a point a few years ago where you could not really say anything against the trans issue. And now we're at a point where people are starting to say, okay, well, maybe we do need to listen to this. And maybe maybe it's not exactly the same as gay because it's everyone's been treating it the same, but the things that have we're starting to see on the trans issue in terms of the rates of detransitioners that is speaking to it being something totally separate from the sexual orientation question of whether or not somebody is homosexual. And so that I think is going to make it a different sort of beast. So um, I think one thing to keep in mind that is inherent to that question, though, is that just like some people will point to woke activists and say they are in a thought bubble, they're in an echo chamber, and they're not really seeing things. I think by the same token, you can find yourself in an anti-woke echo chamber that ends up distorting your perceptions of reality as well. And so just like it's a constant sort of thing where you have to try to remind yourself, you do want to look at the other side and you want to look at things that maybe go against what you assume to be true. And that doesn't mean that you automatically have to accept any contrary opinion, but you want to at least examine it and try to get a steel man position of it and confront those ideas. And what we're seeing right now in the religious domain is that you have people like Jacob Hansen, who's become a major firebrand in the past week because of a video that he released. Um, he's actually confronting a lot of these different issues, even though he takes it from a different perspective and he's defending a different side of things. He's engaging with the other side of things, and that's something that some of the religious or the anti-religious or ex-Mormon paradigms, if you take the philosophy of, well, we can't platform anyone who might cause harm, well, then you're preventing yourself from engaging with some of these ideas. You may end up closing yourself off to some of the nuance, to some of the counterpoints that do need to be confronted and accepted because you have adopted this philosophy of not platforming things that cause harm. So I'm interested. We have kind of a waiting game right now to go with John Dehlin to see, is he going to accept Jacob Hansen's um, acceptance of John Dehlin's invitation to come on his show? Because during the podcast where John Dehlin was addressing Jacob Hansen's video, he said, I invite you to come on and share. And Jacob Hansen's like, okay, let's do it. But now the argument is over the ground rules. So ground rules about, well, okay, well, you can come on my show, but we have to have X, Y, and Z. And for the crowd that likes to not platform harm, I suspect, I don't know, I don't have any insight on this, but I would be disappointed if the ground rules were going to be that it had to be set up in a way where at any moment, if the ex-Mormons felt like, well, even allowing Jacob's opinion to be aired is going to cause harm, therefore we have to immediately stop the program and not platform him anymore. Like if that's going to be the reason that they can't come to terms, I'll be a little bit disappointed because you would want it to be just an open discussion. Millie, what in the world? You would want it to be an open discussion where it's just like, just get together and we'll have a conversation, just like anybody that has conversations about things, even if they don't agree. So, you can do that. You just set it up and just meet and talk. It's pretty easy. If you find that you have to be overly concerned about platforming wrongthink, then you just might want to realize that might be a sign that you should reconsider your position. It doesn't mean you have to surrender your position, but at least be a little bit more open about it. Okay, so let's see. My challenge for the next episode is to make it so that I can hear, or so that other people can hear the call. Let's see here. So somebody mentions that in the past, Dylan has censored guests heavily, like Rod Meldrum. Yeah, the episode with Rod Meldrum, I've heard Chris Hanna and the Porch Time crew say that it was more like a struggle session, and I kind of have to agree with that assessment on it. Several other people have observed that earlier in the Mormon Stories timeline, when they would allow people, even that had controversial views, come on, they would allow them to state their case. They might pose some questions to challenge them on that, but it's really about learning their Mormon story. It's not about trying to get or extract or demand a confession or admission of guilt. And that Rod Meldrum interview really felt more like that. And if you are unfamiliar with struggle sessions, then you can look at some of the episodes on the Chinese Cultural Revolution. I've actually collected a bunch of footage of struggle sessions depicted in various media that I'm hoping to put on my channel sometime soon. So we get a little bit of reminder of what those purity spirals in dogmatic secular political environments look like. Okay, let's see here. Karina says, I've appreciated the content you've curated on your channel. I've wondered why my Ohio testimony is absent among the proponents for House Bill 484, especially in the context of who is platformed. Karina, I have to go back and look at that. I've tried to put as much of those things on just without comment. In some cases, they got so long I had to break them up. And I know in some of the House bills, there were multiple sessions, and I was able to get through one session, but I wasn't able to get to another session. And so I've tried to be comprehensive and not exclude anything in any of those. So if you want to shoot me a link to where your session is, I've tried to do that. It's just that so many states started having committees that it became overwhelming for me to try to collect and gather all of them and put them out there. I think those committee sessions have been really helpful and really important, particularly because you get to see the sort of information and testimony that lawmakers are relying on. You get to see some of how misinformation is being passed through certain committee members. And so the detransitioners and others who have bravely gone to share their life experiences in those committees have been really, really important. So I appreciate you and others that have done that. Okay. Let's see here. I think we just hit an hour mark, and without any other calls, we're just going to call it a night and wish you guys a good Friday. I'll have to look at the quality of these things. I inevitably go back and like, it's such shoddy quality, I'll have to delete it, but hopefully that won't be the case here. Anyway, so with that being said, I will put that off and wish you guys a good Friday night. And until next time, this has been Talk on Things and Stuff.